I can't imagine that anyone's gone through and built an RPG, or really any kind of tabletop game, maybe any game at all, without running into the issue of vestigial mechanics. A vestigial mechanic is, of course, one that made sense earlier in a game's design, but the overall design direction, or maybe specific mechanics, has moved on and rendered it kind of pointless. I just discovered something like that. Like, I'm still in the very earliest stages of development on Code World, and I just found, I've already found a vestigial mechanic. What I originally wanted to do is to give you an example of how this crops up. What I originally wanted to do was have roles work kind of like Blades in the Dark, where mainly just the players are rolling and bad stuff happens during their roll if they don't like spend resources or spend successes on their dice to mitigate it. And that bad guys generally wouldn't be making any active rolls on their own. And so I had a whole threat, or I had a effect and risk gradient, kind of like how Blades in the Dark has, effect and position. And that was what my plan was. And so I have this whole chart that I'm pretty happy with about based on the risk level of the roll, what sorts of consequences can happen as the result of a roll. Time goes on, just a few weeks, really. And I haven't even written down a rules document. I'm just sort of sketching out the kinds of mechanics that I want, how I'm envisioning things working, my vision for the game. And as I do so, I'm more and more leaning into having the adversaries, the sort of generic term for anything that takes an action against the players, or anything that acts against the players in any way, having adversaries make their own roles. That's what I'm really leaning towards. And so having consequences on player roles doesn't make as much sense anymore. And so I was looking at it and I was like, I really like this mechanic, but it doesn't jive with the overall design direction of the game anymore. And so this is a vestigial mechanic. And I feel like basically every game designer is going to have that moment where they go, I like this mechanic, but it doesn't work anymore. What can I do with it? Well, as I see it, you have a few options. You can leave it in. Might be the worst option, but you can leave it in. Maybe it goes unnoticed. Maybe the effect that it had, like the lack of interaction with the rest of the game, the lack of integration with the game, goes unnoticed throughout playtesting, and it makes it to the final product. That has happened before. I believe Fabula Ultima actually revised their initiative mechanic because the one that is printed in the book was written for a previous version, and so it no longer really has a lot of meaning. Like, who goes first in Fabula Ultima is really not that meaningful. It's not worth having a bunch of people roll and having a bunch of modifiers just to find out who takes one turn before the other in a game where the sides alternate. So there's an alternate initiative mechanic that just gets rid of that and is a lot more seamless in how it's integrated into the rest of the game. So that's the first option. You can ignore it or miss it. I think that's probably the least good result. You kind of want to you want to make sure that your game is the best it can be, right? As a designer, you're going to take pride in your game and try to make the best decisions possible. And leaving in something that you kind of know is a problem just because you like it, the responsible thing to do is to not ignore it. So if you're not ignoring it, what can you do? I mean, the next most obvious answer is delete it. Just get rid of it, bite the bullet, kill your darling, delete it from your game. That can sometimes be the right answer. Is it always? No, I don't think it is. I think a better solution is to adapt it, to take what you liked about the mechanic and adapt it into other parts of the game. And this gets into sort of what I consider to be a core skill of game designers, which is understanding the purpose that individual mechanical parts are serving so that you can integrate them somewhere else. Why, like, I'm considering whether or not to launch into a tirade about this. There's a thing that happens sometimes with discussing game mechanics. This is an aside, where someone points out something that one game does, and the person they're talking to is like, yeah, but I don't want that in my game, without realizing that they are looking at the whole picture without understanding the individual parts that are being referenced. If someone says, hey, what you're doing is a lot like how Blades in the Dark does its playbook specific XP system, where like every playbook has individual XP triggers, and so each character sort of like levels up at a different rate based on like leaning into role-playing into like, role-playing aspects. And then the response is, yeah, but I don't want playbooks in my game. Having missed the entire point that like, we're not talking about playbooks, it's just a part of their playbook mechanic. It's kind of like saying that, oh, the food that you're making has a lot of similar elements to how like a pizza is constructed, where you have like layers that complement each other in flavor and then a sprinkling of toppings on top. And you're like, yeah, but I don't have any bread. We're not talking about the bread, right? We're not talking specifically about the bread. We're not talking about like, I'm not saying make a pizza. I'm saying that the thing that you are doing has similar thematic or mechanical elements, and we can learn lessons from how pizzas are constructed, right? So, bringing this back to what we were originally talking about, the adapting an archaic mechanic into your, back into the game, because like you don't want to lose the work. Maybe you don't want to lose the thematic elements. Maybe you just really like the mechanic and you want to make it work somehow. You can do that by understanding the component parts and what they are individually contributing to the game. Take it out, modify it so that it fits somewhere else in the game, and plug it back in. This is kind of an ideal situation when possible. It's not always possible, but when possible, I think this is an ideal situation, because obviously, like, you made the thing that you love. Getting rid of it would be a loss. Reusing it is efficient, for lack of a better word, but also, like, it's an aspect of the game that you have invested in emotionally and creatively, and it's, I think, viewing game design as an art form, I think not sacrificing pieces when you don't have to makes a lot of sense. Sometimes you have to sacrifice, to be clear. Sometimes you have to remove pieces that no longer fit. But if it's worth it, if it's possible, if there is room, you can unplug a mechanic or a subsystem of some sort, reconfigure it, and then plug it back in. If you know how each individual piece works. Now, you might need to sacrifice some of it. You might need to take it out and say, like, okay, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. This works, but it needs to be turned. This works, but I need to, like, put a dent in it here so that it fits. That kind of reconfiguring. I'm using a lot of metaphorical language here because, like, I don't want to talk in specifics. I actually haven't decided how I'm going to handle the code world issue yet. I'm still grappling with that. I have some ideas, but like nothing that I've put down for sure yet. I would like to reuse this, not just because like I put in a lot of work and I'm really happy with the way that this like table of potential consequences works out. I like how it came out, and I want that to not go to waste. That's an emotional response to what should be a logical problem. And so I'm trying not to let that guide me. But more to the point, I think that having, like, okay, so that perfect example. I I have this emotional response where like, I don't want to get rid of something that I've made. I've made this chart of risks and possible consequences for rolls. I don't want to get rid of it because it's something that I made and it feels like it would be wasteful. That's an emotional response. And that I think should be discarded. I think that should be largely disregarded in terms of like what is best for the game. But logically speaking, why did I make that mechanic in the first place? Aha! What purpose was it serving? Can it continue to serve that purpose by changing it mechanically? Putting it into a different context to serve the same purpose. And yes, I think it can. I think I'm going to be able to adapt this mechanic to look entirely different, but reuse kind of the same number, a lot of the same mechanics, and to serve the same purpose of representing what the characters are doing, because they're going to be taking risks. They're going to be going into a dangerous situation where bad stuff is happening all around them, and they still need to accomplish their mission amid myriad dangers. That's why I originally made the mechanic. Now, it doesn't work as written, but I think I can reuse much of it to still create this environment, this feeling, this experience. I want to maintain the experiential aspects of the mechanic, so I have to change how it actually works in play, if that makes sense. I hope it does. And I think that really is like the core part of like anytime you need to update your game in any way, change a mechanic that isn't working, do editing, update things that maybe don't fit anymore. I mean, this started out as me just talking about like vestigial mechanics. I was going to talk about like, how to deal with that. But I think what I'm getting to is actually, and I'm arriving here in real time, so bear with me. I'm getting to, here's how to think about game mechanics and the purpose they serve in your game. They exist to create an experience, right? As a game designers, you are engineering categories of experiences that you want the players to have. And they're going to be largely making those experiences themselves. The GM is going to be making the scenarios, the players are going to be making their decisions, and like those come together to create specific situations that you, a designer, maybe could never imagine. If your game is open enough to it, then yeah, the players should be able to create situations and experiences that you could not have possibly foreseen. But it is still within the boundaries that you have created. It is still within it's like a massive field that you are, seeding with, trees and rocks and nooks and crannies and a river, something like that. You've created this environment in a way that says like, yes, this kind of environment is the kind of environment I want my players to live in. And they're going to go in and find aspects you didn't know were there because you are looking kind of from the high-end macro perspective. They're going to be in it, But you are still creating that experience from, man, I'm getting philosophical here. Dang. You need to, when you are creating this massive field, don't worry about the individual, like every grain of sand. Like that's too much. It's too much for you. What you need to do is, if you have, a desert in a place that shouldn't have a desert, maybe take the desert out. But why did you put the desert there in the first place? You got to think about that. Was it because you want an element of bleakness? Maybe there's something that could communicate bleakness, or it could communicate, waste, or it could communicate maybe some past cataclysm, and you could communicate that in other ways, maybe in ways that are better than a desert per se. I say all that to say this. The experience that you are wanting to create is done with mechanics, but the mechanics are not an experience, right? You are building a larger puzzle, And the experience of playing your game is an emergent property of those individual mechanics. But the individual mechanics are not an experience in themselves. So don't get too attached to those. Pull them out, reuse them somewhere else where they are more useful, where they serve the purpose that you originally intended for them to do. And I think you'll find that your game is much improved by doing so.